I'm able to still go through this process.
Brave woman, raising brave children. Proudly an immigrant mom, bow to the immigrant mom. Brave woman, raising brave children. Proudly an immigrant mom, bow to the immigrant mom. Brave woman.
I'm able to still go through this process.
Brave woman, raising brave children. Proudly an immigrant mom, bow to the immigrant mom. Brave woman, raising brave children. Proudly an immigrant mom, bow to the immigrant mom. Brave woman.
Hello, guys. Welcome to another edition of the Immigrant Mom Show. Thank you for joining me. I'm just going to do what we normally do, which is to share so people can join us and share in all your groups so many people can join us for today's edition. We have a special guest and a topic that I think everybody needs to hear. So let me just go ahead and be sharing. Once you join, please let me know where you're watching from. You know the drill. Let me know where you're watching from. Say hi. I always like to shout out to those that are joining me. Go ahead and share. Hi. Thank you so much for joining. So let's just listen to this music while I go ahead and invite my own friend to be a part of today's. Hi, Wille. Thank you so much for your presence.
I have a message.
All right, go ahead, guys, and share what I'm about to do.
God has sent
Thank
me
you.
to you. I have a message for you. God has sent me to you. Listen, them say, them tell you say you can never be the one. But God say, make I tell you say now you him choose in 1 month, in 1 week. You will sing a new song in 2 days. Lesser
Hi,
than.
guys. Thank you for joining. Thank you, Wille. I have the glasses in every color because I have little kids that keep breaking my glasses.
Congratulations, he has done it for you. And you will come back with a new song to sing. God is good. Yes, you will come again with a new song.
Go ahead and share. So get started. Once you join, let me know where you're watching from.
Congratulations, say what the Lord has done for you. Congratulations, God is good. Them say that
Baba.
that I can never be yours.
Thank you for joining, Doreen. How are you?
God is greater than that.
Thursday once again.
Nobody who can change his mind.
Share to groups so many people can join us.
Through many years, in many ways, I have seen his faithfulness ever and ever. Yeah. Congratulations, I have seen the glory of God. Congratulations, he has done it for me.
Hi, Christian, thank you for joining. My God, this voice is amazing and soothing to the ears. Shout out from Canada. Shout out right back to you. Thank you so much. You make it a point to always be here. Hi, Auntie Mercy. Thank you. Hi, Yoko, Mandara. I appreciate your presence. Thank you guys for joining. What we normally do is, we give it a couple minutes. We give it a couple minutes for people to join because, there's no point getting into the meat of the discussion if people are not here, right? So let's be patient. Hi, Erica. Thank you for joining. Go ahead and share. Today, we're going to be talking about preventing suicide in kids and teens. Hi, Valerie. You're next in line for our guest. So, thank you for joining. So, you see how this goes.
Woman, I beg you, give me your attention. Very, very soon you will share your testimony. One by one, you will tell your testimony.
Hi guys, how you doing? It's Thursday. What's going on in your life? What's going on? All right. I think we'll get started because we have a lot to cover. Good evening, everyone, or maybe morning, afternoon, depending on where you are. Hope you're doing great. My name is Ixtel Mbaacha, the founder of the Immigrant Mom. If you are stumbling onto this site for the first time, we meet here every other Thursday. We have a guest, we have a topic. We talk about things that pertain to us as immigrant moms, immigrant parents, as the immigrant community that will help us. This whole organization started out why? Because I had my child, or I have children now, and my parents were not here. My mom lives miles away. And, I came home that day with a child who was crying. I didn't know what to do. I was so helpless, so vulnerable. And I started thinking to myself, we need a community because we're raising these children in an area so far away from home. I don't even know certain things like, the educational system or things that we need to know to be great parents. And that's why the Immigrant Mom started. And we have a group. It's called the Immigrant Mom Group on Facebook. The live sessions we have on the page are every other Thursday, but every day we're sharing information on the Immigrant Mom Group. We actually have a book club that's starting this Saturday, and the book we're reading is How to Give the Sex Education Talk to Your Children. It's very necessary. Where I came from, some parents did not have that talk, but in today's day, in this Western world where there are sex predators everywhere online, you cannot afford not to know when to have the talk with your children. So that book club is to talk about things like that. Saturday, 7:30 Central Standard Time. So join us. Hi, Victoria. Thank you for joining. Well, today we're going to be talking about preventing suicide in teens and kids. This topic is so important because it's becoming prevalent in our immigrant communities, children as young as 10, 13, 15, taking their own life. Things are going on that are beyond what maybe you and I have experienced growing up. I cannot remember in my childhood of anyone who died by suicide. But right now it's different, with everything that's going on. And so we must talk about it. Your ignorance should not be the reason for why you find yourself in a tight corner, I would say. So we want to learn, and that's why we have our speaker on. I was going to read her bio, but you guys know I don't want to go into all those. I would like for her to introduce herself so we can get talking. So let me at this point bring on, I need to unmute you. Hi, Leslie. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you so much for inviting me to be here this evening. I'm just honored to be able to speak to your group. And I think it's an amazing group that you founded.
Thank you. I appreciate it. So I did not read your bio. I didn't tell them anything about, you. And we're going to get into your story later on. But I just wanted you to introduce, who is Leslie? What do you do? What did you do before? Where do you live? How many kids? Just tell us a little bit about you.
Sure. Well, my name is Leslie Weirich, and I live in northern Indiana. And I'm not sure how many of you have been to the area where I live. I live in a very rural area, and kind of in the country, actually, and close to the state of Michigan. I had two children, a son and a daughter, and am married. I had been an executive recruiter in the financial industry for several years. And then in 2016, our 20-year-old son, his name was Austin. He was a junior at Wabash College, which is west of Indianapolis, Indiana. On September the 10th of 2016, which coincidentally happened to be World Suicide Prevention and Awareness Day, our 20-year-old son took his life. And that changed the course of my life.
Right.
And set me on a path to
So,
try to help other families.
and that's the story that we're gathered here today to hear, because out of your story, we can pull a myriad of lessons that we could all learn from. And so you shared with me a YouTube Austin story that I wanted to share with everyone, because that's, the way you narrated that story touched my heart. So I wanted to give everybody time. Let's watch it, and then we'll get back to asking Leslie questions and just learning from her own experience. If you are just joining, please go ahead and share, because I want as many people to join us as possible.
Our son Austin was a junior.
Excuse me, guys.
I think it's muted.
Yeah, I was trying to.
Suicide is so unique and so.
So let's start from the beginning. Sorry about that, guys.
Our son Austin was a junior at Wabash College in Crawfordsville, Indiana. And on September 10th, which coincidentally is World Suicide Prevention Awareness Day, our son took his life. He was 20 years old. Suicide is so unique and so individual. Everyone's story is different. When you look at our son, you would say he was an overachiever, and he certainly was by the world's standards. But what happens so many times, and as I've met with so many families, those kids put a lot of pressure on themselves. So our son could work really hard on the football field. He could run, his heart out on the track field. In academics, he just would bury himself in the books. But the weak link for our son and in his life was always relationships. But unfortunately, our son became involved in what we would call a pretty toxic relationship in college. We are people of faith. And every morning, all through high school and into college, my husband would always text a scripture verse. The scripture verse that morning was about hope. Austin texted his dad back. His dad said, "Austin, I hope you have a hope-filled day." And Austin said, "Dad, I hope you have a hope-filled day too." So later on that afternoon, about 1:30, I FaceTimed my son. He called me. We talked for about 45 minutes that afternoon. I mean, he was on top of the world. And we always talked on Sunday. Every Sunday he'd call us. And he said, "I love you, Mom. I'll talk to you on Sunday." And I said, "I love you too, Austin. I'll talk to you on Sunday, honey." And that was the last time I talked to my son. It was raining that evening, a lot of rain, lightning, thunder, terrible storm. At 2:30 in the morning, there was a pounding on my front door and a ringing of my doorbell like my house was on fire. Before my husband could even get out of bed, I was running down the front stairs. We have 2 windows on the side of our door. I looked through and I saw the police car parked in front of our driveway. And I opened the door. And this is something no parent ever wants to hear, but especially at 2:30 in the morning. The police officer said, "Do you have a son named Austin Weirich who attends Wabash College?" And I said, "Yes, I do." And he said, "You need to call this number. Your son has been in an accident." So I grabbed the card out of his hand. As quickly as I could, I ran back in to find my cell phone. By that time, my husband was with me. And we called that number, and the dean of the college answered. And he said that he had shot himself and that they were life flighting him to St. Vincent's in Indianapolis, and that we needed to get there as quickly as possible. I had never, ever driven through rain or lightning or thunder like we drove through that night. We were about a half hour down the road when my cell phone rang. It was the emergency room doctor. He asked if we could pull over to the side of the road.
so he could talk to us. He said he was sorry to tell us the ambulance had just arrived with our son and there was no pulse. We just sat in silence on the side of that road for a while. My husband looked over at me and he said, you know, it's like God is crying with us tonight. And I believe that he was.
You're trying so hard to be strong, but you're worth more than the pain that you've been through.
The 1-year anniversary after Austin's death was pretty rough. We were just trying to get through it. That first year was tough. On the 2-year anniversary, I started choosing to volunteer on that day for an organization. It's how I handle that day, that anniversary day. So that evening, my husband and I were getting ready to go to bed. This would be 2018, September 10th, World Suicide Prevention and Awareness Day. I received a text message from one of Austin's roommates, and he said, Mrs. Weirich, I don't know if you've heard, but Evan Hansen, the co-captain of the Wabash football team, took his life today. We're losing so many young people that we need to stick around for this world to be better. And young men like Austin and Evan, they're just an example of that. And suicide doesn't look like Austin or Evan. It looks like every one of us here today. And I always say it's the great equal opportunity employer. It does not care what your socioeconomic background is, how much money you have in your bank account, what color your skin is. Suicide impacts us all. I began speaking 2.5 years ago. I made the decision when our daughter went off to college that I wanted to start speaking in the schools and in any organization that wanted to hear a message of suicide prevention. Once every 8 hours, someone takes their life in the state of Indiana. So as I tell my kids when I speak in the schools, before you go to bed tonight, another Hoosier will have taken their life. Before you get up in the morning, someone else. And too many times, those are people between the ages of 10 to 34. It's the second leading cause of death right now. And if we want to talk about the pandemic, isolation and quarantine have only made things worse. So that's what we're dealing with right now. And it's very, very important that we talk about all aspects of mental health and we start teaching coping skills to our middle schoolers and even elementary. We can live 40 days without food. We can actually live 3 days without water. And we can even live 8 minutes without air, but only 1 second without hope. Every time I share our story, a little part of my heart heals. It's part of my grieving process, and I always say if I waited until I was finished grieving over Austin's death to speak, I'd never speak. I'm always going to grieve. I'm always going to tear up. But in that grief, I found purpose, and I hope that someone that hears it will find a reason to hold on to hope.
I'll fight for you.
Wow, that was very heart touching, Leslie. And I don't know how you're feeling just watching this replay, but it's with so much emotion for me. How are you feeling?
Well, I think one thing I need to share with your moms and your listeners, my daughter is studying music in college, and I should have shared something else with you, but she actually composed and performed the song on that video. And it's called Fight. It's called Fight for You. She wrote it in memory of her brother. And she is a junior studying music composition and music education. And what was really beautiful about the video she did, which is separate from the song, is what you heard. She invited some of the students on her campus. She has a small Christian college she attends a couple hours from where we live. She was amazed at the kids who wanted to be part of the video that had battled either anxiety or depression or attempted suicide. And one of the things I think that I want, your moms and your listeners to hear is, as I said in the video, suicide affects us all. Anxiety affects us all. Depression, we all, go through this world with challenges.
Right.
And I love how you're building the community there, because I think it does take a village when you're trying to raise your kids.
Right.
And more than ever now, the way the world has been this past year in this pandemic, we realize, I said, if there's been any blessing, and I know there's been many, but any blessing that's come out of COVID-19, it's that we are talking about mental health now. And it's not, we have to reduce the stigma.
Right.
And even inside of mental health itself is suicide. And I guess I break it down this way. I had a good friend who lost a son in a car accident. He was 17 years old. And I said to her, I said, do you know the difference between the two of us? She said, what do you mean? And I said, well, after you lost your son in a car accident, if you happen to be in the grocery store or, at Target checking out and someone sees you in line, they come right over to you and they give you a hug. After I lose a son to suicide, if someone sees me in the grocery store, they move to the other aisle and they avoid eye contact.
That is and that's something that we're going to talk about later on, the stigma, because even in our immigrant community, just us having this conversation, there are not many people talking about it, because for a very long time, it's been stigmatized.
Right.
And, I'm glad that you brought this up, and we're going to go deep in detail about it.
Good.
But before we even get that far, how were you able to help Hannah, your daughter, deal with the fact that her brother died by suicide? And this is for other parents who probably, have another kid. How did you handle it?
Well, as you heard in the video, this occurred in the middle of the night. So, our doorbell was ringing and our, pounding on our door woke us all up. And she's upstairs in her bedroom listening to the police on our front porch.
And she was 18, 16 at that time?
Well, let me share this with you. He took his life 3 days before her 17th birthday. And can I tell you how many times I have thanked God that it wasn't on her actual birthday? And Hannah is very comfortable with me talking about this.
Okay.
She started in therapy and counseling, which I realized we were very blessed to be able to provide that for her. I'm a huge advocate and proponent of that. I feel like we all need someone to talk to, and I want to talk about that tonight. And I realize there's many, many resources out there. There's online help. The online counseling services, they have skyrocketed in the last year, with people reaching out, which is a good thing. It's too bad it took a worldwide pandemic for people to realize it's just natural and normal that we need to talk to someone. But so our daughter has been in therapy and counseling. She does it online via Zoom. She has a wonderful therapist who she meets with every other week. And I think it's great, and I think, even before Austin's death, Austin was in counseling. So one thing I want to share with your moms is, he was actually in counseling all throughout that summer. In fact, quite a bit.
So why was he in counseling? Was there a problem prior that you were aware of? Why was he in counseling?
This is a great question. So let me tell you a little bit about my son, Austin. I think that'd be a good place for us to start.
Yeah.
So we live in a very small community. Goshen, Indiana is where my children grew up. And so we only have one high school. And when you only have one high school in town, everyone knows everyone. Austin was what we would call by the world standards an overachiever. He was the president of his freshman, sophomore, junior, and senior class at Goshen High School. He ran track, very athletic, ran track and played football All 4 years he was there. He was the scholar athlete in one or both of those sports all 4 years. He graduated with weighted honors above a 4.0 GPA. He received $26,000 in renewable academic scholarships, which of course allowed him to go on and play football at the college of his choice. And I'll tell you a little bit about how unique his college was. So, in fact, they have an award called the Hugh O'Brien Leadership Award, which is only given to one student each year who's a rising junior. They send them to a leadership conference. Austin won the Hugh O'Brien Leadership Award. You have to be nominated by your principal and your teachers and the administration. So by the world standards, he was an overachiever. And I'm going to talk about what happens to those kids who have so much pressure on themselves. So I don't share all that with your listeners because I want to boast about my son's achievements. I share that because I want them to understand that's the face of suicide. Can I tell you how many people came up to me? We had 650 people at his celebration of life memorial service. We did not even run an obituary. And I had so many people come up to me in the weeks and months after his suicide and say, I cannot believe this happened to your family. If this can happen to a kid like Austin Weirich, this can happen to anyone's family, anyone's child. And I said, hold that thought. Hold that thought. So you think this, Austin had it all. How could he even think about taking his life? Well, the more I've been learning and the more I've been researching mental health and mental illness, my son put so much extreme pressure on himself to be a perfectionist. I mean, if he got an A-, he couldn't take it. So in my son's life, the weak link, of course, was girls. It was relationships, because he also put pressure on anybody he was in a relationship with to be perfect. And that's difficult to be in a relationship with someone who's seeking that amount of perfection.
Right.
So, girls would disappoint him when he was in high school. Someone might say they'd go on the prom with him and then they'd change their mind and he would emotionally plummet. So to get back to your original question, the reason he was in counseling was to deal with the fact that, life is not perfect, and girls are not perfect, and relationships are not perfect, and you have disappointments in life. So one of the hardest things for him was to deal with failure and disappointment. He couldn't handle it.
So before all of this, had you noticed any signs, anything for you to have said, yeah, my son is a perfectionist, he's performing well, but this is a red flag? Did you notice anything?
Yes. Good question. I get asked that quite a bit whenever I speak. And I always tell everyone, we can talk about warning signs, and I want to talk about those with your listeners. The problem with suicide being so unique and so individual, like everyone's backstory is different. I can share also about the co-captain of his team, what happened there. Beautiful young man who was 21 years old. I tell everyone I saw a lot of warning signs with Austin, and I saw no warning signs with Austin. The day that he died, we FaceTimed for 45 minutes. He called me. He was on top of the world. My son actually lifted weights and worked out at 4:30 the afternoon that he died that evening. Not exactly something you're going to do if you think you're going to take your life that evening. You're not going to be working out, right? So he called his dad. He was on top of the world, told us about his plans, his weekend plans, what he was going to do. And we even tracked his credit card. Everything he told us he was going to do, he did. So his suicide was very impulsive. It was in the heat of an argument with this young girl. And we're going to talk about that, the prefrontal cortex of the brain. Evan Hansen, the co-captain of his team, this young man was 21 years old. He had just been recognized on Saturday as the co-captain of the football team. His parents were there on the football field with him. And he actually, that was Saturday, he walked into the woods on Monday morning and lost hope. Evan had been playing tackle football since he was 7 years old, a very, very good football player. And he had chronic traumatic encephalitis, CTE, which is repeated concussions and brain injury, which leads to depression. And they had just actually had him in counseling. He was on some medication. They had recently switched his medication 2 weeks before he took his life. So their circumstances were very, very different. Their backstories were very, very different. They were both high achieving, kind of perfectionist type young men. And what I caution parents about who have their kids and well-meaning, thinking, I want to keep them in sports, it's teaching them leadership and how to be on a team, and or music or whatever, is your children, when they're growing up, they need some time to just chill and be kids. They need some downtime. And when they're going from event to event to event, from sports to music to whatever it is, it does not give that young brain time to rest. And, this is a good segue here to talk about the brain.
Yeah, before we even talk about the brain, I like that you bring that up, because my culture, where I came from, and a lot of the people who are watching, we believe in, excellence.
Right.
Your child has to have A grade. And we push. That's the honest truth.
Right.
If we're going to have an honest conversation, we push the kids. We
Yes.
say,
Yes.
I didn't travel this far to start life
Right.
in a new country and have you bring me some B's and C's, or have you just, play around.
Right.
We have moms that the kids are in summer school after summer school, they're in a different program and they're doing something else. But where do we find that balance? Leslie, we really just want our kids to be ahead of the game.
Right.
How do we strike the balance?
Right. And, we learned that lesson with Austin. We paid the ultimate price. He wanted to be in football. So, you want to provide that for your child. So we sent him to Notre Dame football camp, all the football camps that he would, and we used to say, when we look back now, we say Austin really battled depression, but he masked it in perfectionism. So if he was having a bad day, he might stay in the weight room at school an hour longer and lift weights, or, get up an hour earlier and study for a calculus test. So he put that pressure on himself. But I do know that there are parents, and I understand, and I want to sympathize. I cannot empathize because I'm not an immigrant mom, but I want to sympathize with the fact that you have come to this country and you want your child to have the best opportunity to succeed. So I think what we need to do is redefine, what does success look like? What does success look like? Austin chose a college. There's only 3 colleges left in the United States that are all male. He chose an all male college. And we thought that just fit his personality, because it's very driven. You have to have very high GPA to get in there. One of their accolades is, we train and build and educate leaders. And 1 out of every 8 Wabash alums or grads is a CEO or president of a company the first 10 years after he graduates. But you pay a cost for that. You pay a price for that. So I feel like parents need to hear this. If there's only one, there's several takeaways tonight, but if there's only one takeaway I need, are you doing it for your kids? And I'm not judging. I want people to learn I'm not a perfect mom. I lost my son to suicide. But are you doing it for yourself? So we have to be very careful that we're not trying to live what we did not receive. And we all want a better life for our children. I want that for my daughter, but I also need to know when to back off and when to say, you know what, this has to be her dream, not my dream for her. And there is a fine line, Extel. You're right. There's a very fine line. And as parents, we want the best for our kids. We want them to have everything. But sometimes, I spoke at a school, and a young woman came up to me afterwards and she said, my mom's always talking to me about, taking these weighted honors classes so that I can get into the best college. And she's got these colleges picked out for me. But she said to me, and it broke my heart, I didn't know what to say to the mom. She said, but what if they're not the colleges that I want to go to? So I think we have to raise our kids where they're able to come to us and tell us,
Yeah.
and not be afraid that they're going to disappoint us or let us down. This is their life,
Right.
and it's a hard lesson to learn, because
Right.
you're right. You walk a fine line between wanting what's best for them and wanting them to live their best life is different
Right.
than what we want for them.
And when you say this, like I like to tell everyone who's listening, a lot of kids who are immigrant kids, whose moms are the older immigrant moms, they are in therapy for things like this,
Yes.
for loss of identity, because their parents thought that success meant being a doctor or being a lawyer, even though they had no business going that career path. And it's I think we really need to sit around the coffee tables with our spouses and ask ourselves this question: what is success? Because we might be moving around with a definition of success handed down to us by culture, by our parents, ignoring the very livelihood of our kids. And this is a topic we can talk about all evening. One other question I wanted to ask you is, in hindsight, what do you think you could have done better?
Well, we speak about that, and we're very open and honest. We started counseling too late for our son. I wish we would have started counseling. And this brings me to a point where I'd like to talk about a program that I'm trying to get implemented in all of our schools, in my county, in another county. We wish that we would have started counseling for Austin in elementary school, to be honest with you. When I was just reading an article this week about how you can almost tell, psychologists are now doing research where they can actually tell in infancy and adolescence whether kids are going to be struggling with anxiety, depression, and mental health issues. And they were talking about, my husband and I read the article, and we both looked at each other and said, that was Austin. They were talking about kids who had a really difficult time when they were young. And I'm saying like 8, 9, 10, pre-adolescents, pre-teens, in accepting and dealing with failure, in dealing with things not going well. Well, we look back, that was Austin. That was Austin. And, and so, and once again, he just went at warp speed, and he'd get in another sport, he never let himself just accept failure. And I think if there's a lesson in our story, it's that failure is not failure. Failure is actually education.
Right.
Failure is teaching your kids resiliency. And we have to teach our kids resiliency. Look what has just happened in our world in the last year. And I tell everybody, I was listening to another speaker talk. I listen to a lot of podcasts. And I work for our community mental health center now as a suicide prevention specialist. So I've done a lot of training in mental health. And I was listening to somebody talking about, resiliency in our kids. And they said, one of the best things, and I never even realized this, that has happened with COVID-19, right?
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't matter how much money you have. It doesn't matter where you live, whether you're an immigrant mom, whatever. We can't fix this epidemic this pandemic for our kids. We can't make the mask go away, right?
Right.
We can't make the social distancing go away. We can't fix it. And as I'm going to tell you, I'm a fixer mom. I want to fix things for my kids, right? I want them to not have to suffer, not have to go through hard times. That is a parenting mistake.
That's a parenting mistake.
We have to let our kids go through hard times, because if we try to protect and shield them from all of the pain, they're not going to know how to handle it when they get older. They're not going to know how to handle it in college or high school or in the job, in the workplace. So they said the great thing about COVID is our kids have had to pivot. They've had to do hybrid learning, online learning. Hasn't been perfect. It's been messy, and technology is not always what we want it to be when our kids are learning, but it's taught our kids resiliency.
Right.
It's taught our kids that, our kids, whatever age, and I know you have really little ones, so they won't remember the pandemic. But for the moms that are listening that have kids that are maybe 10, 12, 15, guess what? their kids are going to go to college someday or high school, and they're going to study about the pandemic of 2020. And they're going to come home and tell their parents they read this, or they read this on a podcast, or they heard this on a website, and their parents are going to go, "Oh, I lived through that. I was 15 years old when that pandemic took. Let me tell you what we went through in that pandemic. You know, we ran out of toilet paper in that pandemic. You know, I mean, they will remember that, and it's building resiliency. And if you want to protect what I call protective factors, and I do want to talk about this program, Sources of Strength, this evening, but if you want to talk about protecting your kids from self-harm is things like cutting and other things that they do, preventing self-harm, suicide attempts, suicide, all of that, you build resiliency. You build resiliency by being there when your kids fall, but not trying to catch them before they hit the ground.
And that's the mistake a lot of us make. We hurry up. We think it's being a good
very
mom.
Natural. Yeah.
Like, how do I let her cry or let him cry? You know, in what ways, if you can share any specific instances looking back that you felt like you could have let Austin handle stuff that you stepped in?
Right. Well, you know, I think football was hard for Austin. And I'll tell you, with my son, there was a combination of factors. His freshman year of college, he had 3 back-to-back injuries. The final one took him by ambulance off the field. Just during a practice, he dislocated an elbow, but they actually had to take him to the hospital for that injury. He shredded some tendons in his finger. He dislocated his shoulder. He had in 3 weeks' time, 8 weeks' time, he had 3 football injuries. You know, I'm going to tell you something. I called that college. I'm a mom. I called that college. I was like, my son's hurt, you know, and I'm sure, you know, that football coach was like, who are you? Your son's in college. But, you know, I couldn't stand those injuries. I couldn't stand watching those injuries. But he had to work through that. You know, he had to work through that himself. I couldn't rescue him. That's the other hard part for parents. When your kids go away to college, you can't rescue them.
Right.
Austin was 165 miles away. And, you know, once again, got in this relationship that he knew it was not healthy. He told other friends it was not a healthy relationship. And he was trying to get out of it. You know, unfortunately did not get out of it. But you know, you can't fix things for them when they're in college and they're hours away from you. So you have to teach them that resiliency as they're growing up, how to problem solve, how to think for themselves. And, you know, that goes once again with that prefrontal cortex that I teach about, because researchers used to say the prefrontal cortex of our brains is where our decision making is. It's where our reasoning, our judgment, our logic, it's all right up here, front of the brain. Well, they used to say that you were 25 years old by the time that was fully developed, finished growing. Mm-hmm. Now they just changed it in the last 2 years. It's 27 years old. So when I speak in high schools and middle schools, I have a PowerPoint. I show my son. He was 6'4", 240 pounds, big defensive end football player. I said, look, he looks like this big, strong man, right? Austin had 7 more years for his prefrontal cortex to finish growing and developing. So guess what? In the heat of an argument that night, when push came to shove, and he needed those higher level reasoning skills, he was impulsive. He didn't have them. He had 7 more years for his brain to develop. So we have to teach these coping skills. We have to give these kids tools and resources that are really just like second nature. They go to them when they're in a panic mode, because their brains aren't going to be there for them. So I have apps that I introduce at schools, and we can talk about those. But I want to make sure that parents know that you're not always going to be with your kid in that moment to rescue them. Right?
Very true. Very, very true. And maybe our listeners don't know this. You are a spiritual, religious Christian woman.
Yes.
And most of the time, there might even be people who are waving this talk off to say, I'm a Christian. I raise my children the Christian way. Mm-hmm. There might be people saying, you know, we go to church and I teach them the Bible. But we just heard that the day of, you know, the day he died, the day Austin died, his dad had texted him a scripture of hope. Let us talk about this myth, this misconception that suicide cannot happen in a Christian home. Or maybe, you know, they don't need to teach coping skills because scripture is the coping.
Right. Well, we can't pray this away. We can pray for wisdom. We can pray for, you know, and I do believe that God surrounds us. And I do believe, you know, and I want to share that scripture verse with you.
Sure.
It was Romans 15:13. May the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace as you trust in him, so that you may overflow with hope by the power of the Holy Spirit. We are people of great faith. And my husband texted Austin that scripture verse, and he said, Austin, I hope you have a hope-filled day. And he texted his dad back a few minutes later, Dad, I hope you have a hope-filled day too. I love you, Austin. So we are still people of hope. This suicide did not, it took our son, it did not take our faith and our hope.
Amen.
And I said, and as I share with everyone when I talk, I said, you know, I'm not a biblical scholar, but when I was planning Austin's service and we were working on putting Austin's service together, there was a scripture verse that popped right out in front of me. I've clung to it for almost 5 years now. And I'm living it. And it's about Joseph and his brothers. It's Genesis 50:20. You intended to harm me, but God used this for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many, many lives.
Right.
So we would never have chosen this path as a family. Of course, we would never have chosen this path. But we still believe in a God who can take our tragedy and use it for good. And I'm going to tell you how God uses our story. I'm going to give you one example.
Sure.
The first talk that I gave was to a group of young women, in fact, about 75 young women. And my talks can get pretty emotional. We talk about what happened the evening that Austin died. We were asked to identify his body. We talk about what that feels like. Now, there was a young woman that evening who ran out of the back of the room before my talk, at the end of my talk, but before it was finished. I had no idea she even left the room. Later on that evening, one of the women came up to me and said, you saved a life tonight. And I said, what? She was one of 6 children, this young girl. She had just written 5 letters to her brothers and sisters the day before my talk. She was going to take her life the next day. She came to my talk. She told her mom, she said, I had no idea what suicide did to a family afterward. And I almost did this to our family, and I'm so sorry. She is a sophomore at Indiana University studying business right now.
Wow.
That's why I do what I do. Because if there is one kid that needs to know, you're not crazy, you're not weird, if you have feelings of harming yourself, you're normal. We've all had those. Many of us have had those. But that just because you feel that way doesn't mean you're going to always feel that way, and doesn't mean you need to take your life. And what I tell young people is I teach them about their brain and why it's impulsive and why their emotions get ahead of them. We talk about all of the way the brain is wired and built. And I said to them, you cannot make your feelings matter. Your feelings are important, but you cannot make a permanent decision based on a temporary problem, based on how you're feeling in the moment, based on whether or not you had a fight with your boyfriend or you got in a fight with your parents, because 10 minutes from now, an hour from now, you're going to feel totally different.
Right.
And if my son could come back here today, if you had known him, he would be the first person to tell you what an incredibly stupid thing he did and how he wished he could take it back. And people who've attempted suicide and lived will tell you the second I jumped, the second I did, I regretted it. The second I did it.
Yes.
So as people of faith, what we need to do is we need to stop judging, love on each other, support each other, and realize that mental illness is an illness.
Right.
If we break our leg, we put a cast on it. If we break our arm, we put it in a sling or we put a cast on it. Well, the last time I checked, my head, your head, Extal, it's connected to the rest of your body.
Right.
Our heads can get sick too. So there is no stigma. And the church is doing a much better job. I've spoke at a lot of churches recently, and I speak at a lot of youth groups. The church is doing a much better job of talking to young people and their congregations about mental illness and mental health. And, you know, there's not a cookie cutter, one size fits all answer to this.
Right.
Some people are born with a predisposition for diabetes. They develop diabetes. Some people are born with a predisposition for heart disease or high blood pressure. Some people are born with a predisposition for depression or anxiety. But the good news is, God has provided us with people and resources to help each other through it.
Right.
You know, counseling, medicine. So that's why we need to stop acting like it's a curse that people have. It's not a curse.
Right. And, you know, a lot of times, you know, people would say, after they hear that someone died by suicide, they would say, but why didn't they talk to me? Why didn't they come to me? Or if you're feeling a certain way. And the reason why people don't come forward, or most people may not come forward in our immigrant community, is because of the stigma that is still attached to mental health issues, to depression, to anxiety. You know, something that I shared with my husband that I never shared with him, that when I was 22, I almost killed myself. A guy had just rejected me and I thought it was the end of the world. And I stood on the 11th floor of a building ready to throw myself off. At that time, anybody who had known Excel, if you think about it, 2009, I was working at a law firm in Washington, D.C. on an internship. Anybody could have thought she had her life laid out. But then if I had acted on that impulse that time, I would not be here to talk about it. I think that as a community, the stigma part of it is where we're saying individually, I am ready to listen. You may never understand what could cause a person to want to take their life. It's not for you to understand their reason. It's for you to be able to open up, for them to tell you that this is how they feel.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I will share with you that when I talk to young people, especially young people, teenagers, I will share with you, statistics have shown that no matter how suicidal they are, how long they've had suicidal thoughts, suicidal ideation, till that last minute, they are wavering between life and death. They don't want to take their lives. That's not even what it's about. They want the pain that the overwhelming circumstance, whatever they've had just happen, the heartbreak, you know, whatever they've had just happen, it's so overwhelming. They want it to stop, and they don't know how to get it to stop because, once again, many times they're young. That reasoning, that prefrontal cortex is not developed. It can't slow down enough to go, whoa, this is bad, but it's only temporary.
Right.
So we have to provide these students with resiliency and tools when they're young, because we already know life is hard.
Right.
I mean, Jesus told us that, right? In this world, you will have trouble.
Right.
We know life is hard. And we know that he has overcome that. But we also, the older we get, the longer we live, Extal, that we can look back on our life and go, oh, I got through that. I'm going to be okay.
Right.
But when you're 15 or 16, it does feel like the end of the world because you don't have life experience to draw from.
Right. Right.
So one of the things that I absolutely have every young person do, and I know we're going to be providing some links on your Facebook page and for your listeners, is I love this app that's called Not Okay.
And that was an app you developed? Is that something that you, okay?
Yes, it's called the Not Okay app. I have every student, in fact, I ask teachers to have the kids bring their phones to class with them. And I will bring it up And I will even show them that I have it on my phone, and I will say, look, if you can see this, it looks like
Yeah.
not okay.
So
It
you
looks
can-
like not okay. And how this app works is a free app. The Not Okay app is very simple to use. It simply has a GPS locator in it. So we talk about the brain. We talk about why they can't act on their feelings. Then I have them pull out their phone. And it's very important. I tell them, I said, here's the part you're not going to like. You can upload up to 5 people, 5 contacts in that Not Okay app. But here's the tricky part I tell for my young people they don't like. It can't be your friends your own age. Because guess what? We just talked about your prefrontal cortex, right? They have the same age prefrontal cortex you do. So it has to be a trusted adult. Doesn't even have to be a member of your family. It might be, might not be. Might be a coach, might be a teacher, might be a neighbor. You can put 1, you can put 2, 3, up to 5. And how it works is they have to accept. So you have a covenant agreement, they accept it. When they accept it, you go in, they go in as your person in your Not Okay app. You are making an agreement with your person in your app, no matter how bad you feel. If you've had the worst fight in the world and broke up with your girlfriend or boyfriend, if you posted something stupid on social media and you just don't even want anybody to see it, and you're going to take your life in the middle of the night, you're not going to do it. You have that Not Okay app. You're going to click Not Okay. It's going to send out, depending on how many people are in your app, Excel's not okay. I'm on my way. And that person will get to you. And then once they get to you, they'll let the other people know in your circle of, I say your safe circle, Excel's okay. I'm with her. Okay.
So is this available just to kids, or even adults can download this?
Anyone. I have had so many adults say to me, I have the Not Okay app on my phone now because I heard your talk. Anyone. And I love it's simple. It's basic. I want every kid to have the Not Okay app on their phone, and I want them to understand how to use it. Simple, basic. It's life-saving. I also want them to have, our kids don't use their phones to talk and call. They text, right? They text. So we have to speak to them in the language they understand. So I want them to have the text crisis number on their phone. And the text, and there's, of course, the National Suicide Prevention Hotline number is great. But the problem is our kids, when they're in that panic mode, they're not going to dial a number. They might text, and they are texters, right? That's how we all communicate.
Foundation is a well-known.
So the text number is the crisis text hotline is 741-741. So I take, it's like a little Klingon sticker thing into the schools. I hang it in all my schools. I have them each take a picture of the 741-741 text crisis line. It's 24/7. It's free. And they will respond within 90% of those texts will be responded within 5 minutes with a trained counselor. Okay. Mm-hmm. So if you do something stupid at midnight, because we know kids stay up all night on their phone or whatever, right, you can text that. Okay. You can text that 741-741.
That's a wonderful resource. And we will put, that's why you need to join the Immigrant Mom group for those that are immigrant moms or women, because we're going to share all this information, yes, since we cannot have all the links and all the numbers on here. And like you said, Leslie, we have so much to talk about.
I know.
The hour is almost up. But before, I prepared a nice video to share with everyone on Austin's memory. You mentioned the stigma and how people could see you at the store and walk the other way. But here we're saying no. Even if he died by suicide, he was a person that you cherish, just like every other mom listening who either lost a child to suicide. So let's, I just wanted to share with everyone the sweet memories that you have.
Thank you.
Of Austin. Some tech issues here, but it's gonna play.
Survivors of a suicide loss on an overwhelming, distressful time, which is further upset by the presence of stigmatization. Majority of people just do not know how to approach the subject of suicide with the bereaved, and so they tend to avoid the subject or avoid the memory of the deceased person. In our effort to destigmatize death by suicide, we asked Leslie to share some fond memories of Austin.
When I think of my son Austin, one of the first memories that comes to mind is eating and food, because he was a big boy. He loved to eat. We had so many great memories in the kitchen of him growing up, after football practice and just meals around the table. But I think one of my favorite memories of Austin was on Saturday mornings when it was rainy, or not that, when the weather was colder. We'd just sit around the TV and watch the Food Network. And he loved a show called Diners, Drive-Ins, and Dives. So we found a restaurant about 4 hours from where we live, and he said, "Mom, can we go over there?" It's called Thurman's. And there was a sandwich there called the Terminator. You could eat that sandwich, and they put your name on this wall of fame. So we drove over there one weekend, and Austin made his best attempt to eat that sandwich. He didn't quite make it, but he sure gave it a good try. So when I think of my son, I just think of how much he loved food, and just all the great memories we had in the kitchen with him growing up.
Usually, what people grieving want to do is to remember the person's life, not just their death, and not just the way in which they died. And today on this platform, we remember Austin and what his life was. And Leslie shares with us how she would want for Austin to be remembered.
When I think of how I want our son Austin to be remembered, I can't separate children and older people. Austin had a love of children. You know, he had a lot of little cousins in our family, and when anybody would come to visit or we'd have a reunion, he always had one of the kids he was in the pool with or playing with. So he loved children. But the other thing that was really unique about Austin was he really loved older people. He became part of a men's group that there was about 7 men in there and my son. So I think the average age of the men were probably in their 60s to 70s. And then there was my 16, 17, 18-year-old son. And they faithfully met every morning, Tuesday mornings when he was in high school at 7 a.m. He promised them after he went off to college that he would FaceTime in with them and continue to meet with that group, which he always did. And so even the Tuesday before he died, he met with that group and led that book study, in fact. So I'd like my son to be remembered by, you know, how he loved and who he loved, and just the fact that he was drawn to children and older people, I think says a lot about who he was and his character and how loyal he was to the people that he loved.
The Immigrant Mom will continue to educate our community on suicide prevention and push forward the effort to destigmatize death by suicide by holding space for family and friends suffering the loss of their loved one, the liberty to grieve without societal shame or imputed guilt.
Thank you, Leslie, for sharing everything with us. Well,
Thank you.
over the hour, and I just wanted you to leave one word of wisdom for anyone probably who is currently in your shoes grieving for the loss of their child, or for those of us who are saying we want to do everything to make sure this does not happen. Just leave us with one parting word of wisdom.
Well, you know, I started an organization called Clearly Hope. And I always say I want to leave everyone with just a clear message of hope. And, you know, when we can look at statistics, sometimes they get overwhelming to us because we see how many young people are taking their lives today. But I wanted to share with everybody a statistic that gives me hope. You know, for every one young person that takes their life, there's 25 that attempt and live. So that means they're getting hope and they're getting help. And so I hope to be able to continue sharing more information with your group. And I will continue, I will add some resources for them to look at, as well as my contact information. But I think if there's one thing that I can share to remove the stigma, I always ask everybody to, language is powerful and how we use it, and our words matter. We do not, as a mom who's lost a child, as well as for all those suicide survivors, we do not use the word commit suicide. We say our loved one died by suicide. We're even okay if you say they killed themselves. But when you use the word commit, it has a very negative connotation and a stigma. We say someone committed a robbery, or we say they committed a crime. Our loved one did not commit a crime when they took their life. They died by an illness and a brain injury. So we say, we never say someone committed a heart attack or committed a stroke. So we ask everyone to be sensitive and to use the term died by suicide or even killed themselves. But let's just change the language up, and that will help the stigma. And just know that it's okay to not be okay. And make sure for everybody you love tonight, share the Not Okay app with them.
Awesome. Wow. Thank you so much, Leslie. At this time, I wanted to show you all the love. I'm not sure if you can see the comments that have been coming in.
I love it. Thank you so
says,
much.
thank you. Erica says, thank you. Doreen says, thank you, ladies. Doreen again says, this was helpful. Linda says, very enlightening. The comments are coming in. This was very resourceful. Thank you so much, Leslie. Your message was spot on. The thank yous are coming in over and over, and would like to have you back with us just to check in.
I would be honored. It would be my honor.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Thank you once again. All right, guys, that was it for today's session. It was packed with a lot of emotion. So much we have talked about, so much we have learned. Are you a part of the Immigrant Mom group on Facebook? I have said this about 5 times. You need to be a part of this so that you can know better for yourself and for your family. And you can join the book club, because we have a book we're reading on Saturday, 7:30 Central Standard Time. Thank you guys so much for joining us, for journeying with us, for participating. We love and appreciate your presence, and hope you have a great Thursday and a great weekend. And we're going to be back in 2 weeks with Valerie to tell us about birth, the whole process of having babies, and much more. Look out for that flyer. Thank you all, and have a great evening. God bless you.